What we want, said Harris, is a change. At this moment the door opened and Mrs. Harris put her head in to say that Ethelbertha had sent her to remind me that we must not be late getting home because of Clarence. Ethelbertha, I am inclined to think, is unnecessarily nervous about the children. As a matter of fact, there was nothing wrong with the child whatever. He had been out with his aunt that morning, and if he looks wistfully at a pastry cook's window, she takes him inside and buys him cream buns and maids of honor, until he insists that he has had enough. Okay, you just good, right? When you explained to them that you had no original intention of getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to play cricket on the croquet lawn, or to mimic the history of the early church by shooting with a crossbow at dolls tied to a tree, that as a matter of fact, left to your own initiative, you would have slept peacefully till roused in Christian fashion with a cup of tea at 8. They are firstly astonished, secondly apologetic, and thirdly sincerely contrite. Wow, that's kind of cool. Has a whole wacky piece going on.
We were riding our machines through this wood on the Monday afternoon in the company of many other cyclists, for it is a favorite resort with the Hanoverians on a Sunday afternoon, and its shady pathways are then filled with happy, thoughtless folk. Among them rode a young and beautiful girl on a machine that was new. She was evidently a novice on the bicycle. One felt instinctively that there would come a moment when she would require help, and Harris, with his accustomed chivalry, suggested we should keep near her. Harris, as he occasionally explains to George and to myself, has daughters of his own, or to speak more correctly, a daughter, who, as the years progress, will no doubt cease practicing Catherine wheels in the front yard and will grow up into a beautiful and respectable young lady. This naturally gives Harris an interest in all beautiful girls up to the age of 35 or thereabouts. They remind him, so he says, of home. We had ridden for about 2 miles, when we noticed a little ahead of us in a space where 5 ways met, a man with a hose watering the roads. The pipe, supported at each joint by a pair of tiny wheels, writhed after him as he moved, suggesting a giant worm, from whose open neck, as the man, gripping it firmly in both hands, pointing it now this way and now that, now elevating it, now depressing it, poured a strong stream of water at the rate of about a gallon a second. What a much better method than ours, observed Harris enthusiastically. Harris is inclined to be chronically severe on all British institutions. How much simpler, quicker, and more economical. You see, one man by this method can in 5 minutes water a stretch of road that would take us with our clumsy lumbering cart half an hour to cover. George, who was riding behind me on the tandem, said, "Yes, and it is also a method by which, with a little carelessness, a man could cover a good many people in a good deal less time than they could get out of the way." George, the opposite to Harris, is British to the core. I remember George quite patriotically indignant with Harris once for suggesting the introduction of the guillotine into England. "It is so much neater," said Harris. "I don't care if it is," said George. "I'm an Englishman. Hanging is good enough for me." "Our water cart may have its disadvantages," continued George, "but it can only make you uncomfortable about the legs, and you can avoid it. This is the sort of machine with which a man can follow you round the corner and upstairs." "It fascinates me to watch them," said Harris. "They are so skillful. I have seen a man from the corner of a crowded square in Strasbourg cover every inch of ground and not so much as wet an apron string. It is marvelous how they judge their distance. They will send the water up to your toes and then bring it over your head so that it falls around your heels. They can—" "Ease up a minute," said George. I said, "Why?" He said, "I'm going to get off and watch the rest of the show from behind a tree. There may be great performers in this line. As Harris says, this particular artist appears to me to lack something. He has just soused a dog, and now he's busy watering a signpost. I'm going to wait till he is finished." "Nonsense," said Harris. "He won't wet you." "That is precisely what I'm going to make sure of," answered George, saying which he jumped off and, taking up position behind a remarkably firm elm, pulled out and commenced filling his pipe. I did not care to take the tandem on by myself, so I stepped off and joined him, leaving the machine against a tree. Harris shouted something or other about our being a disgrace to the land that gave us birth and rode on. The next moment I heard a woman's cry of distress. Glancing round the stem of the tree, I perceived that it proceeded from the young and elegant lady before mentioned, whom, in our interest concerning the road waterer, we had forgotten. She was riding her machine steadily and straightly through a drenching shower of water from the hose. She appeared to be too paralyzed either to get off or turn her wheel aside. Every instant she was becoming wetter, while the man with the hose, who was either drunk or blind, continued to pour water on her with utter indifference. A dozen voices yelled imprecations upon him, but he took no heed whatever. Harris, his fatherly nature stirred to its depths, did at this point what, under the circumstances, was quite the right and proper thing to do. Had he acted throughout with the same coolness and judgment he then displayed, he would have emerged from that incident the hero of the hour, instead of, as it happened, riding away followed by insult and threat. Without a moment's hesitation, he spurted at the man, sprang to the ground, and seizing the hose by the nozzle, attempted to wrest it away. What he ought to have done, what any man retaining his common sense would have done the moment he got his hands upon the thing, was to turn off the tap. Then he might have played football with the man, or battledore and shuttlecock as he pleased, and the 20 or 30 people who had rushed forward to assist would have only applauded. His idea, however, as he explained to us afterwards, was to take away the hose from the man and, for punishment, turn it upon the fool himself. The waterman's idea appeared to be the same, namely to retain the hose as a weapon with which to soak Harris. Of course, the result was that between them they soused every dead and living thing within 50 yards, except themselves. One furious man, too drenched to care what more happened to him, leapt into the arena and also took a hand. The three among them proceeded to sweep the compass with that hose. They pointed it to heaven, and the water descended upon the people in the form of an equinoctial storm. They pointed it downwards, and sent the water in rushing streams that took people off their feet, or caught them about the waistline and doubled them up. Not one of them would loosen his grip upon the hose. Not one of them thought to turn the water off. You might have concluded they were struggling with some primeval force of nature. In 45 seconds, so George said, who was timing it, they had swept that circus bare of every living thing except one dog, who, dripping like a water nymph, rolled over by the force of water, now on this side, now on that, still gallantly staggered again and again to its feet to bark defiance at what it evidently regarded as the powers of hell let loose. Men and women left their machines upon the ground and flew into the woods. From behind every tree of importance popped out wet, angry heads. At last there arrived upon the scene one man of sense. Braving all things, he crept to the hydrant, where still stood the iron key, and he screwed it down. And then from 40 trees began to creep more or less soaked human beings, each one with something to say. At first I fell to wondering whether a stretcher or a clothes basket would be the more useful for the conveyance of Harris's remains back to the hotel. I considered that George's promptness on that occasion saved Harris's life. Being dry, and therefore able to run quicker, he was there before the crowd. Harris was for explaining things, but George cut him short. "You get on that," said George, handing him his bicycle, "and go. They don't know we belong to you, and you may trust us implicitly not to reveal the secret. We'll hang about behind and get in their way, ride zigzag in case they shoot." I wish this book to be a strict record of fact, unmarred by exaggeration, and therefore I have shown my description of this incident to Harris, lest anything beyond bald narrative may have crept into it. Harris maintains it is exaggerated, but admits that one or two people may have been sprinkled. I have offered to turn a street hose on him at a distance of 25 yards and take his opinion afterwards as to whether sprinkled is the adequate term, but he has declined the test. Again, he insists there could not have been more than a half a dozen people at the outside involved in the catastrophe, that 40 is a ridiculous misstatement. I have offered to return with him to Hanover to make strict inquiry into the matter, and this offer he has likewise declined. Under these circumstances, I maintain that mine is a true and restrained narrative of an event that is, by a certain number of Hanoverians, remembered with bitterness unto this very day.
We were on our way to Prague and were waiting in the great hall of the Dresden station until such time as the powers that be should permit us onto the platform. George, who had wandered to the bookstall, returned to us with a wild look in his eyes. He said, "I've seen it." I said, "Seen what?" He was too excited to answer intelligently. He said, "It's here. It's coming this way. Both of them. If you wait, you'll see it for yourself. I'm not joking. It's the real thing." As is usual about this period, some paragraphs, more or less serious, had been appearing in the papers concerning the sea serpent, and I thought for the moment he must be referring to this. A moment's reflection, however, told me that here in the middle of Europe, 300 miles from the coast, such a thing was impossible. Before I could question further, he seized me by the arm. "Look," he said. Now, am I exaggerating? I turned my head and saw what, I suppose, few living Englishmen have ever seen before. The traveling Britisher, according to the continental idea, accompanied by his daughter. They were coming towards us in flesh and blood, unless we were dreaming, alive and concrete. The English Mylor and the English Meath, as for generations they have been portrayed in the continental comic press and upon the continental stage. They were perfect in every detail. The man was tall and thin, with sandy hair, a huge nose, and long Dundurry whiskers. Over a pepper and salt suit he wore a light overcoat reaching almost to his heels. His white helmet was ornamented with a green veil. A pair of opera glasses hung at his side, and in his lavender-gloved hand he carried an alpenstock a little taller than himself. His daughter was long and angular. Her dress I cannot describe. My grandfather, poor gentleman, might have been able to do so. It would have been more familiar to him. I can only say that it appears to be unnecessarily short, exhibiting a pair of ankles, if I may be permitted to refer to such points, that from an artistic point of view called rather for concealment. Her hat made me think of Mrs. Hemans, but why I cannot explain. She wore side-spring boots, prunella I believe used to be the trade name, mittens and pince-nez. She also carried an alpenstock. There's not a mountain within 100 miles of Dresden, and a black bag strapped to her waist. Her teeth stuck out like a rabbit's, and her figure was that of a bolster on stilts. Harris rushed for his camera, and of course could not find it. He never can when he wants it. Whenever we see Harris scuttling up and down like a lost dog, shouting, "Where's my camera? What the dickens have I done with my camera? Don't either of you remember where I put my camera?" Then we know that for the first time that day he has come across something worth photographing. Later on he remembered it was in his bag. That is where it should be on an occasion like this. They were not content with appearance. They acted the thing to the letter. They walked gaping around them at every step. The gentleman had an open Baedeker in his hand, and the lady carried a phrase book. They talked French that no one could understand, and German that they could not translate themselves. The man poked at officials with his alpenstock to attract their attention, and the lady, her eye catching sight of an advertisement on someone's cocoa, said, "Shocking," and turned the other way. Really, there was some excuse for her. One notices, even in England, the home of proprietaries, that the lady who drinks cocoa appears, according to the poster, to require very little else in this world. A yard or so of art muslin at the most. On the continent she dispenses, so far as one can judge, with every other necessity of life. Not only is cocoa food and drink to her, it should be clothes also, according to the idea of the cocoa manufacturer. But this by the way. Of course, they immediately became the center of attraction. By being able to render them some slight assistance, I gained the advantage of 5 minutes' conversation with them. They were very affable. The gentleman told me his name was Jones, and that he came from Manchester, but he did not seem to know what part of Manchester or where Manchester was. I asked him where he was going to, but he evidently did not know. He said it depended. I asked him if he did not find an alpenstock a clumsy thing to walk about with through a crowded town. He admitted that occasionally it did get in the way. I asked him if he did not find a veil interfere with his view of things. He explained that he only wore it when the flies became troublesome. I inquired of the lady if she did not find the wind blow cold. She said she had noticed it, especially at the corners. I did not ask these questions one after another, as I have here put them down. I mixed them up with general conversation, and we parted on good terms. I have pondered much upon the apparition, and have come to define definite opinion. A man I met later at Frankfurt, and to whom I described the pair, said he had seen them himself in Paris, 3 weeks after the termination of the Fashoda incident. While a traveler for some English steel works whom we met in Strasbourg remembered having seen them in Berlin during the excitement caused by the Transvaal question. My conclusion is that they were actors out of work, hired to do this thing in the interest of international peace. The French Foreign Office, wishful to allay the anger of the Parisian mob clamoring for war with England, secured this admirable couple and sent them round the town. You cannot be amused at a thing and at the same time want to kill it. The French nation saw the English citizen and citizeness, no caricature, but the living reality, and their indignation exploded in laughter. The success of the stratagem prompted them later on to offer their services to the German government with the beneficial results that we all know. Our own governments might learn the lesson. It might be as well to keep near Downing Street a few small, fat Frenchmen to be sent around the country when occasion called for it, shrugging their shoulders and eating frog sandwiches, or a file of untidy, lank-haired Germans might be retained to walk about smoking long pipes saying, "So?" The public would laugh and exclaim, "War with such! Would be too absurd." Failing the government, I recommend the scheme to the Peace Society.
Moderate to strong and low winds are forecast to develop in 1 to 2 to straight to late this afternoon and ease overnight. An approaching Pacific frontal system will spread gale to marginal storm force southeasterly winds offshore and to parts of the central and southern waters overnight. These winds will persist all day Sunday and continue through Sunday night. Technical marine synopsis for the Pacific waters issued by Environment Canada at 0400 Pacific Daylight Time Sunday, April 17th for today, tonight, and Monday. By 2200 Pacific Daylight Time tonight, frontal system located on a line northwest to southeast over Explorer. Secure a day. Marine forecasts for Pacific waters issued by Environment Canada at 0400 Pacific Daylight Time Sunday, April 17th for today, tonight, and Monday. The next scheduled forecast will be issued at 1030 Pacific Daylight Time. Fog and slight visibility less than 1 mile. Strait of Georgia, north of Nanaimo. Gale warning in effect. Wind light, increasing to southeast 10 to 20 knots, early this morning, then becoming southeast 15 to 25, near noon. Winds becoming southeast 10 to 20, early this evening, then increasing to southeast 20 to 30, after midnight. Winds becoming southeast 25 to 35, overnight, then diminishing to southeast 15 to 25, Monday afternoon. Winds becoming southerly 15 Monday evening. Periods of rain overnight and Monday. Strait of Georgia, south of Nanaimo. Strong wind warning in effect.